Captain Elena Vasquez adjusted the strap of her worn leather messenger bag as she stepped out of Uber at the main gate of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The September sun hung low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the sprawling military installation that had once been as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Now, after 3 years away, it felt both intimately known and strangely foreign. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a charcoal gray blazer over a white blouse, and comfortable flats that whispered against the pavement as she approached the visitor checkpoint. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried herself with the upright posture that never quite left people who'd spent years in uniform, even when they tried to blend into civilian life. Elena had returned to Fort Bragg for a single purpose: to renew her Department of Defense contractor credentials. After leaving active duty, she'd taken a position with a private security consulting firm that worked with special operations units, training them in advanced interrogation resistance and cultural intelligence. It was work that used her skills without requiring her to deploy again, without asking her to make the sacrifices that had already cost her so much. The visitor center was a small, climate-controlled building just inside the main gate, staffed by military police who processed everyone from delivery drivers to congressional delegations. Elena had been through dozens of these checkpoints over the years, in dozens of countries. This should have been routine. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? She approached the counter where a young specialist, couldn't have been more than 22, was reviewing identification cards with the methodical attention of someone who'd been trained to spot inconsistencies. His nameplate read Diaz. "Good afternoon," Elena said pleasantly, sliding her driver's license and current contractor credentials across the counter. "I'm here to renew my DoD credentials. I have an appointment with the security office at 1600. Specialist Diaz picked up her documents with practiced efficiency, his eyes scanning the information with the kind of focus that suggested he took his job seriously. Elena appreciated that. In her experience, the people who got complacent at security checkpoints were the ones who let real threats slip through. But something made Diaz pause. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at something on her contractor badge, then back at her driver's license, then back to the badge again. He reached for his computer mouse and began typing, his movements becoming more deliberate. "Ma'am, can you confirm your full name for me?" "Elena Marie Vasquez." She kept her voice calm and professional, though a small flutter of unease stirred in her chest. She'd been through enough security screenings to know when something wasn't quite right. Diaz typed more, his frown deepening. He picked up her contractor badge again, studying something in the corner that Elena couldn't see from her angle. Then he looked up at her, his expression shifting from routine professionalism to something more guarded. "Ma'am, I need to verify some information. Can you wait here for just a moment?" It wasn't really a question. Elena nodded, stepping back slightly from the counter as Diaz picked up a phone and turned away, speaking in a voice too low for her to hear clearly. She caught fragments, credentials, verification, supervisor, but nothing that explained what had triggered this additional scrutiny. Through the window, Elena could see the familiar landscape of the base. Parking lots filled with military vehicles, soldiers in camouflage walking between buildings, the distant sound of training exercises echoing across the facility. 3 years ago, she'd been part of this world. Now she was an outsider looking in, and the difference felt more profound than she'd expected. Her phone buzzed. A text from her daughter's school. Reminder, parent-teacher conference tomorrow at 3 p.m. Elena's heart squeezed. Sophia, 8 years old now, smart as a whip, and blissfully unaware of most of what her mother had done before she was born. Elena had worked hard to keep it that way, to give her daughter a normal childhood unburdened by the weight of classified operations and combat deployments. "Ma'am." Diaz had returned, but he wasn't alone. A sergeant stood beside him now, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen enough in her career to be skeptical of everything. "I'm Sergeant First Class Morrison," the woman said, her tone professionally neutral. "I understand you're here for credential renewal?" "That's correct," Elena replied. "I have an appointment with the security office in about 40 minutes. Morrison picked up Elena's credentials, studying them with the same intensity Diaz had shown. But her focus seemed to be on something specific. Elena could see her eyes fixed on a particular notation or symbol, though she couldn't tell what it was from her position. "Ms. Vasquez, I need to ask you some questions about these credentials." Morrison's voice had taken on an edge that made Elena's instincts sharpen. "Can you tell me about your military service history?" Elena kept her expression neutral, though internally she was trying to understand what had triggered this level of scrutiny. "I served in the Army for 12 years. I separated 3 years ago with an honorable discharge and have been working as a DoD contractor since then." "What was your MOS?" Morrison asked. "Military occupational specialty, the Army system for categorizing job roles. 35M, human intelligence collector." It was the truth as far as it went. What Elena didn't mention were the additional qualifications, the specialized training, the assignments that never appeared on any public record. Morrison's eyes flickered with something that might have been recognition or might have been suspicion. "And your rank at separation?" "Captain." "What unit were you assigned to?" Elena hesitated for just a fraction of a second. This was where things got complicated. "Multiple units over my career. My last assignment was with USASOC, United States Army Special Operations Command." The mention of USASOC made Morrison's posture shift almost imperceptibly. Her eyes returned to Elena's credentials, studying something in detail that Elena still couldn't see. Then Morrison exchanged a glance with Specialist Diaz that spoke volumes. This had just become more than a routine verification. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step over to the holding area while we verify some information," Morrison said, gesturing to a row of plastic chairs against the wall. It was phrased politely, but Elena recognized an order when she heard one. "Is there a problem with my credentials?" Elena asked, keeping her voice even. "They were issued by DIA less than 6 months ago." "That's part of what we need to verify," Morrison replied, her tone giving nothing away. "Please have a seat. This shouldn't take long." Elena moved to the holding area, her mind racing through possibilities. Her credentials were legitimate. She'd gone to the full background investigation and security clearance renewal process. Everything was in order. So what had triggered this? Through the plexiglass partition, she could see Morrison making phone calls, pulling up information on a computer, speaking in low tones to Diaz. Other people came and went to the visitor center. A delivery driver, a family visiting a soldier, a contractor with an equipment manifest. All processed quickly and efficiently. Only Elena remained in the holding area, watching the minutes tick by on the wall clock. 1,545 hours. 15 minutes until her appointment at the security office. Morrison was on the phone again, and this time Elena could read the tension in the sergeant's body language. Whatever she was hearing wasn't making the situation better. When Morrison hung up, she immediately picked up the phone again and dialed a different number. 1,550 hours. 10 minutes until her appointment. Elena pulled out her own phone, thinking she should at least notify the security office that she might be late, but Morrison appeared at the partition before she could dial. "Ma'am, I need you to come back to the counter, please." Elena complied, and her unease deepened when she saw that 2 more people had arrived. A staff sergeant in military police uniform and a lieutenant whose expression suggested he'd been briefed that this was a serious situation. The lieutenant stepped forward, his nameplate reading Castellano. He picked up Elena's credentials and driver's license, examining them with careful attention before looking up at her. His eyes were hard, assessing. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm Lieutenant Castellano with the base Provost Marshal's office. We've run your credentials through our verification systems, and there are some significant discrepancies that need to be addressed." Elena's stomach tightened. What kind of discrepancies? Castellano held up her contractor badge, pointing to a small ribbon representation in the corner that Elena had honestly stopped noticing months ago. It was part of the standard DoD contractor badge design, a way to denote certain qualifications or clearances. But now, looking at which ribbon it was, she understood why this had escalated. It was the Presidential Unit Citation. This decoration, Castellano said, his voice taking on an edge, is one of the highest unit awards in the United States military. It's awarded to units that display extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy. I'm aware of what the Presidential Unit Citation is, Elena said quietly. Then you're also aware that only a very small number of units have received this award in the entire history of the United States military. Castellano set the badge down on the counter with careful deliberation. According to our records, no female Army officers have served with units that received the PUC during your service period. The implication hit Elena like a physical blow. They thought she was lying. They thought she was wearing decorations she hadn't earned. Lieutenant, I can explain. What you can explain, Castellano interrupted, his voice hardening, is why you're carrying credentials that appear to fraudulently claim you serve with a unit that earned the Presidential Unit Citation. Stolen valor is a federal offense, Ms. Vasquez. It's not something we take lightly. I'm not claiming anything fraudulently, Elena said, forcing herself to remain calm despite the anger and fear rising in her chest. Those credentials were issued by the Defense Intelligence Agency after a complete background investigation. Everything on that badge is accurate. Morrison had pulled up something on her computer, and her expression suggested she'd found information that confirmed their suspicions rather than alleviating them. Ma'am, according to the databases I have access to, there's no record of you serving with any unit that received the PUC. Your service record shows you as a human collector with various assignments, but nothing that would qualify for this decoration. That's because Elena stopped herself. This was the problem with classified service. The very secrecy that had protected her operations now made it impossible to defend herself. My complete service record isn't in standard databases. It's classified at a level that requires special access. Even as she said it, Elena knew how it sounded. Like exactly what someone committing stolen valor would claim. A convenient excuse that couldn't be easily verified. Castellano's expression hardened further. Ms. Vasquez, I've heard every excuse in the book from people trying to claim military honors they didn't earn. My records are classified is probably the most common one. I understand how this looks, Elena said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. But if you contact the DIA security office, they can verify. We've already contacted them, Morrison interjected. They confirmed you work as a contractor, but they said they'd need to escalate the verification of your specific credentials to their headquarters. That process could take days. Days. Elena's mind reeled. She had a daughter to pick up from school. She had work obligations. She had a life that didn't include being detained at a military gate because her own service record was too classified for standard verification. The staff sergeant who had been standing silently stepped forward, his hand resting on his duty belt in a way that suggested he was preparing for the situation to escalate. Lieutenant, what do you want us to do? Castellano studied Elena for a long moment, his jaw tight. She could see the conflict in his eyes. He was a military officer, trained to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also trained to take threats to military honor seriously. Stolen valor wasn't just illegal. It was an insult to everyone who had actually served. I'm going to need to detain you pending verification of your credentials and investigation of potential fraudulent claims, Castellano said finally. Sergeant Morrison, call for additional MP support. We're going to need to transport Ms. Vasquez to the Provost Marshal's office for formal questioning. You're arresting me? Elena's voice came out sharper than she intended. For credentials that were issued by a Defense Intelligence Agency after full investigation, I'm detaining you for suspected stolen valor, Castellano corrected. If your story checks out, you'll be released with an apology. But until we can verify that you actually served with a PUC-awarded unit, I'm not letting you walk around this base claiming honors you may not have earned. Through the window, Elena could see an MP vehicle pulling up to the visitor center. 2 more military police officers were getting out, their expressions professionally neutral but alert. This was really happening. She was about to be arrested, detained, whatever word they wanted to use, for the crime of having served her country in ways that were too classified to easily prove. Lieutenant, please, Elena said, trying one more time. I have a daughter. She gets out of school in 2 hours. I need to pick her up. Castellano's expression softened for just a moment, but his voice remained firm. We'll make sure someone contacts your family. But right now, I need you to cooperate with the MPs. If your credentials are legitimate, this will all be resolved quickly. The two additional MPs entered the visitor center, and Elena felt the walls of her carefully constructed civilian life beginning to crumble. She thought about Sophia, waiting at school. She thought about her colleagues at the security consulting firm, who knew she'd been military but didn't know the details. She thought about all the sacrifices she'd made, all the missions she completed, all the nights spent in hostile territory with nothing but her training and her team to keep her alive. And now she was being treated like a fraud. One of the MPs, a female specialist who couldn't have been more than 25, approached with handcuffs. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. Elena's training screamed at her to resist, to fight, to do something. But she was also a mother now and a civilian, and causing a scene would only make everything worse. She turned around slowly, feeling the cold metal of the handcuffs close around her wrist with a click that sounded like the closing of a door on everything she'd built since leaving the military. You have the right to remain silent, the specialist began, and Elena closed her eyes as a Miranda warning washed over her. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not like this. Through the window of the visitor center, a small crowd had begun to gather. Soldiers and civilians who had noticed commotion, who were now watching as a woman in civilian clothes was being detained by military police. Elena could feel their stares, could imagine their thoughts. Who is she? What did she do? Probably stolen valor. They'd been cracking down on that. The shame burned hotter than any physical wound she'd ever received. The MP vehicle smelled like stale coffee, and the chemical cleaner used to sanitize the back seat. Elena sat with her hands cupped behind her, the metal digging into her wrists with every bump in the road. The two MPs in the front seat, Specialist Chen and Private First Class Rodriguez, maintained professional silence, occasionally speaking in low tones into their radio as they transported her across the base. Fort Bragg rolled past the windows, familiar and foreign all at once. Elena recognized buildings, training areas, unit headquarters. 3 years ago, she'd driven these roads in uniform, sometimes in tactical vehicles preparing for deployment, sometimes in her personal car heading home after 18-hour days. She'd been part of this world, respected and trusted. Now she was a suspect. The provost marshal's office was a squat, utilitarian building that managed to look both bureaucratic and intimidating. Chen and Rodriguez escorted her inside with professional courtesy. They weren't rough or cruel, just efficient. They'd done this before, and Elena was just another person being processed through the system. The booking area was exactly what she'd expected. Fluorescent lights that hummed slightly, linoleum floors that squeaked under boots, the smell of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. A desk sergeant looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from bore routine to heightened interest when he saw Elena. "Another stolen valor case?" he asked Chen, his tone suggesting this was becoming depressingly common. "Lieutenant Castellano's orders," Chen confirmed. Suspect was attempting to enter the base with credentials claiming she served with a Presidential Unit Citation Unit. Verification came back negative. Suspect. The word stung more than Elena wanted to admit. The processing was methodical and dehumanizing in the way that all such procedures were meant to be. Fingerprints. Photographs from multiple angles. Personal property inventoried and sealed in a plastic bag. Her phone 1, wallet 1, Keys 1, messenger bag and contents 1, watch 1. The desk sergeant documented everything with practiced efficiency, occasionally asking her confirmed details in a voice that carried no judgment but also no sympathy. "Any medical conditions we should be aware of?" he asked. Elena hesitated. Did she mention the tinnitus from the explosion in Kandahar? The chronic pain in her left shoulder from the dislocation she'd suffered during extraction from a compromised position in Syria? The nightmares that still woke her sometimes, gasping and reaching for weapons that weren't there? "No," she said finally. Those wounds weren't the kind that mattered here. After processing, they placed her in a holding cell. Not a jail cell exactly, but a secure room with a metal bench, a camera in the corner, and a door with a small window. The handcuffs came off, and Specialist Shin gave her a brief, almost apologetic look before closing the door. And then Elena was alone. She sat on the metal bench, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline that had kept her composed began to fade. The reality of her situation crashed over her in waves. She'd been arrested at a military base for stolen valor. Her career as a DoD contractor was probably over. No one would hire someone with this kind of accusation hanging over them, even if it was eventually disproven. Her security clearance was certainly suspended. Her daughter, Sophia, Sophia would begin out of school in less than 2 hours. Elena had been supposed to pick her up, take her to gymnastics practice, help her with her homework. Instead, Sophia would be waiting with the teacher, wondering why her mom was late, maybe starting to get scared when Elena didn't answer her phone. Elena pulled her knees up to her chest, pressing her forehead against them as she fought back tears. She'd survived combat deployments. She'd survived being captured by enemy forces and held for 3 days before her team extracted her. She'd survived losing teammates, seeing friends killed, carrying the weight of classified operations that she could never fully share with anyone. But this, being accused of faking the very service that had defined her adult life, this cut deeper than any physical wound. Through the small window in the door, Elena could see MPs moving through the corridor, speaking to each other in voices too low to hear. One of them glanced at her cell, his expression unreadable, before moving on. She wondered what they'd been told about her. Probably that she was just another civilian trying to claim military glory she hadn't earned, wearing decorations that belonged to real heroes. If only they knew. The door opened, and Lieutenant Castellano entered, carrying a folder and a digital tablet. He was followed by Sergeant First Class Morrison and another officer Elena didn't recognize, a captain with the bearing of someone who'd spent significant time in combat zones. The captain's nameplate read Blackwood. "Ms. Vasquez," Castellano began, settling into one of the 2 chairs in the small room. "This is Captain Blackwood from our Criminal Investigations Division. He's going to be conducting the formal investigation into your credentials." Blackwood sat down across from Elena, his dark eyes studying her with a kind of assessment that suggested he'd interrogated a lot of people and knew how to spot deception. But there was also something else in his gaze, a hint of curiosity that Elena couldn't quite interpret. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm going to be direct with you," Blackwood said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "We take stolen valor very seriously at Fort Bragg. This is a post where real heroes serve every day, where people have earned their decorations through blood and sacrifice. When someone falsely..." claims those honors is an insult to everyone who actually did the work. "I understand that," Elena said quietly, "because I am one of those people." Blackwood opened the folder, pulling out printed copies of her credentials. "So you're claiming you actually served with a unit that received the Presidential Unit Citation?" "I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating a fact." Then help me understand. Blackwood leaned forward, his expression neutral but intent. According to every database we have access to, including classified personnel systems, there's no record you serving with any PUC-awarded unit during your time in the Army. Your service record shows you as a 35M human intelligence collector with various assignments to tactical units and some time at Fort Huachuca. Nothing that would qualify for a PUC. Elena took a breath, knowing that what she was about to say would sound like a convenient excuse, but was nonetheless true. My complete service record isn't in those databases. My assignments from 2014 to 2019 are classified under special access programs. The service record you're looking at is my cover documentation. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but Elena saw Morrison and Castellano exchange skeptical glances. This was exactly what they'd expected her to say. The excuse that every stolen valor fraudster claimed when confronted with evidence. Cover documentation. Blackwood repeated slowly. You're saying the Army created a fake service record for you? Not fake. Simplified. Standard practice for personnel assigned to certain classified programs. Elena met his eyes directly. Captain, I know how this sounds. I know you probably heard similar claims from people trying to excuse fraudulent credentials. But I'm telling you the truth. If you contact the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Division and provide them with my full name, date of birth, and social security number, they can verify my actual service history. We've already contacted DIA. Castellano interjected. They said you work as a contractor, but that verification of your specific credentials would require escalation to their headquarters. That could take days, maybe weeks. Then escalate it, Elena said, hearing the edge of frustration creep into her voice. Because I'm telling you the truth, and this is a massive waste of everyone's time. Blackwood pulled out another document, a printed photograph that Elena recognized immediately. It showed a military unit citation, specifically the Presidential Unit Citation Award Certificate for a unit designated only by a number, Task Force 714, Special Operations Command. This, Blackwood said, is the only Army unit that received a Presidential Unit Citation during your service period. Task Force 714. It was awarded for operations in Iraq and Syria against ISIS leadership from 2015 to 2017. He looked up at Elena. Are you claiming you served with this unit? Elena's throat tightened. Task Force 714. The designation was public knowledge now. It had been mentioned in a few carefully sanitized news reports after ISIS's defeat. But the actual composition of the unit, its specific operations, and the identities of most personnel who served with it remain classified. I can't answer that question without violating my security clearance obligations, Elena said carefully. Morrison made a sound that might have been a scoff. That's convenient. It's not convenient, Elena snapped, her patience finally fraying. It's the reality of serving in classified programs. You want me to violate federal law by disclosing information about special access programs? Fine. Charge me with that too. At least it would be an accusation based on something I actually did. Blackwood held up a hand, calming the situation. His expression had shifted slightly. Elena couldn't tell if it was suspicion or something else. Ms. Vasquez, I understand your frustration, but you have to see this from our perspective. We have a woman presenting credentials that claim service with one of the most elite and secretive military units in the United States. Those credentials can be verified through normal channels. And your explanation is that everything is classified. You can see why that raises red flags. I can see why it's complicated, Elena acknowledged. But complicated doesn't mean false. Captain, I spent 12 years in the Army. I deployed 7 times. I've served in countries I can't name, doing work I can't describe, with people whose names are still classified. And yes, I served with Task Force 714. I earned that Presidential Unit Citation, and I damn well have the right to have it noted on my contractor credentials. The room fell silent. Blackwood was studying her with renewed intensity, and Elena realized she might have just made a mistake. Admitting she'd served with Task Force 714, even if she hadn't disclosed any operational details, was more than she should have said. But she was tired of being treated like a criminal for having done her job. If what you're saying is true, Blackwood said slowly, then there would be other ways to verify it. Physical evidence, scars from combat injuries, knowledge of specific protocols or equipment, people who serve with you who could vouch for your service. All of which I have, Elena said, but I need to contact people who have the appropriate clearances to discuss this, which is difficult to do from a holding cell with no access to my phone. Blackwood glanced at Castellano and Morrison, then back at Elena. She could see him calculating, weighing his options. He didn't want to release someone who might actually be committing stolen valor, but he also didn't want to end up detaining someone whose service record was legitimately classified. We're going to keep you here while we make some calls, Blackwood said finally. Lieutenant Castellano, give me the direct number for DIA's Special Activities Division. I want to speak to someone who can actually verify or deny Ms. Vasquez's claims. He stood, gathering his folder. Ms. Vasquez, I suggest you cooperate fully. If your story is true, you'll be released with an apology. If it's not, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As they filed out of the room, Elena caught Blackwood's eye one more time. For just a second, she thought she saw something there. Recognition, maybe, or at least a possibility that she might be telling the truth. But then the door closed, and she was alone again. Elena leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes. Somewhere across Fort Bragg, in one of the headquarters buildings she could no longer access, there were people who knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. Her former commanding officers, the intelligence analysts she'd worked with, the operators she'd served alongside in places like Mosul and Raqqa, and a dozen villages whose names never made it into any official reports. But none of them could help her now, not without going through layers of bureaucracy that would take days or weeks to penetrate. And in the meantime, she was just another suspect in a stolen valor case, sitting in a holding cell while her daughter waited at school and her carefully rebuilt civilian life collapsed around her. The irony was almost too bitter to bear. She'd survived years of serving in the most dangerous places on Earth, only to be destroyed by the very secrecy that had protected those operations. Through the small window, Elena could see the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows across Fort Bragg. In a few hours, it would be dark. Sophia would be home, probably with Elena's emergency contact, Mrs. Chen from next door, confused and scared about why her mother hadn't picked her up. And Elena could do nothing but wait and hope that someone, somewhere, would be able to verify the truth before it was too late. 2 hours had passed. Elena knew this because she could see the clock mounted above the door through the small window. 18:15 hours. Sophia's gymnastics class would be starting right now. Mrs. Chen had probably already picked her up from school, fielding questions Elena could only imagine. Where's Mommy? Why didn't she come? Is she okay? The door opened and Captain Blackwood returned, this time alone. He carried a different folder, thicker than before, and his expression was harder to read. He set a bottle of water on the table in front of Elena, without comment, then took his seat across from her. I've spent the last 2 hours on the phone with various people at DIA, JSOC headquarters, and Army Personnel Command. He said, without preamble, I've gotten a lot of runaround, we'll have to verify that, and that information requires special access. But I also got some information that's made the situation more complicated. Elena unscrewed the water bottle and took a long drink, her throat dry from stress. Complicated how? Complicated because a few people who were willing to talk to me confirmed that Task 4714 did have female personnel attached to it during your claimed service period. They wouldn't give me names or specific details, but they confirmed it's theoretically possible that you served with them. Blackwood opened the folder. They also told me something interesting. They said that if you actually did serve with that task force, you wouldn't be able to prove it through normal channels. Your service record would have been sanitized. Your decorations would have been awarded through classified ceremonies. And most of the people who could vouch for you would still be under non-disclosure agreements. So you're starting to believe me, Elena said quietly. I'm starting to believe that you might be telling the truth, Blackwood corrected. But might be isn't good enough to release you from custody, especially not when we're talking about one of the highest awards in the military. I need more than theoretical possibilities. I need actual evidence. He pulled out several photographs from the folder, sliding them across the table. They showed various military decorations and ribbons, each one photographed in detail. These are the individual decorations that personnel assigned to Task Force 714 were authorized to wear. Some of them are common: Combat Infantry Badge, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. But some of them are very specific. He pointed to one photograph showing a distinctive green and white ribbon, the Joint Service Commendation Medal with V device. This particular variant was only authorized for specific operations during the ISIS campaign. Elena looked at the photograph, her stomach tightening. She knew that ribbon. She'd worn it on her dress uniform for exactly one ceremony before being told to remove it from her standard service record. If you served with Task Force 714, Blackwood continued, you would have been authorized to wear this decoration. Do you have it? It's at my apartment, Elena said, along with the rest of my decorations. I don't generally carry them around. That's convenient. That's normal, Elena countered. How many veterans do you know who carry their dress uniform decorations in their purse? They're in a display case in my bedroom closet. Blackwood made a note on his tablet. We'll need to verify that. Give me your address, and I'll send someone to retrieve them. Elena recited her address, then added, my daughter will be there. She's 8 years old, and she's probably terrified because I didn't pick her up from school. Please don't make this any worse for her than it already is. For the first time, Blackwood's professional mask cracked slightly, a hint of discomfort crossing his face. We'll be discreet. I'll send plainclothes investigators, and they'll explain to whoever's with your daughter that you're assisting with a security matter and will be home as soon as possible. A security matter, Elena repeated bitterly. That's one way to describe being arrested for stolen valor. You haven't been charged with anything yet, Blackwood said. You're being detained pending investigation. There's a difference. Not to my 8-year-old daughter, not to my employer, not to my reputation in the veteran community. Elena leaned forward, her voice intense. Captain, I understand you're doing your job. I understand why this looks suspicious. But every minute I sit in this holding cell, my life is falling apart. My daughter is scared. My colleagues are probably hearing rumors. And all of this because the very classification that protected my operations is now making it impossible to prove I actually served. Blackwood was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the folder. Tell me about your scars, he said finally. What? Your scars. Combat injuries. If you served in hostile territory with a Special Operations Task Force, you would have been exposed to enemy fire. The way you move when we brought you in, you favor your left shoulder. That's consistent with an old injury. He pulled out another document. Your service record, the unclassified version, shows a Purple Heart Award for wounds received in 2016. But it doesn't specify the nature of those wounds or the circumstances. Tell me about them. Elena took a breath. This was dangerous territory. Discussing the specifics of her injuries meant discussing the operations where she'd received them. But maybe selective disclosure was better than sitting here indefinitely. My left shoulder was dislocated during an emergency extraction from a compromised position in Syria, she said carefully. Our vehicle hit an IED. I was thrown against the door frame. The shoulder has never been quite right since then. I have a surgical scar from the repair operation and permanent nerve damage that causes chronic pain. When in 2016, July, I can't be more specific about the date or location without violating classification. Blackwood made notes. What else? Shrapnel wounds from the same IED. Left leg, left side of my torso. Some of the shrapnel is still in there. Too deep to remove safely. It sets off metal detectors in airports. Elena pulled up her pant leg slightly, revealing a faint network of scars across her calf. You can see some of the entry points. Blackwood studied the scars with professional interest. Those are consistent with fragmentation injuries. What about other deployments? Other injuries? Broken ribs in Afghanistan, 2015. Fractured wrist in Iraq, 2017. Concussion from an explosion in 2018 that left me with permanent tinnitus and occasional vertigo. Elena paused. And there are some injuries I can't discuss because they occurred during operations that remain classified. You're asking me to take a lot on faith, Blackwood observed. I'm asking you to do your job thoroughly, Elena replied. Check my medical records. They'll show all of those injuries. Even if the circumstances of how I received them are redacted, talk to the military hospitals where I was treated. Verify that I actually received the care I'm describing. We're already doing that, Blackwood said. But medical records can take time to retrieve, especially if they're classified. He leaned back in his chair, studying her. Here's my problem, Ms. Vasquez. Everything you're telling me is consistent with someone who actually served in special operations. But it's also consistent with someone who's done very thorough research on how to fake credentials convincingly. I've seen stolen valor cases where people knew every detail, every acronym, every piece of equipment. They'd researched obsessively. The only way we caught them was finding actual veterans who could prove they weren't there. Then find the actual veterans I served with. Elena said, find the people who are on my team. Let them tell you whether I'm real or fake. I'm trying, but most of them are still serving in classified positions. They can't just show up and vouch for you without going through their chain of command, which takes time. Blackwood's frustration was evident now. This is why special access programs are so damn difficult when it comes to things like this. The very security measures that protect operations also make it nearly impossible to verify anything quickly. The door opened, interrupting their conversation. Sergeant First Class Morrison entered, carrying a printed document that she handed to Blackwood. He scanned it quickly, his expression darkening. What is it? Elena asked. Blackwood looked up at her, and for the first time since entering the room, she saw something in his eyes that might have been doubt about his own suspicions. Your DIA employment file just came through. It confirms you're a current contractor with a TS/SCI clearance with multiple Special Access Program authorizations. He read from the document. Clearance level. Top secret with sensitive compartmented information access. Special access programs. Multiple. Classified. Clearance investigation date. 6 months ago, adjudicated favorably. Which means, Elena said carefully, that 6 months ago, the Defense Intelligence Agency conducted a thorough investigation of my background, my service record, and my qualifications, and determined that I was trustworthy enough to access some of the most sensitive intelligence programs in the United States government. Does that sound like someone who's faking their credentials? Morrison spoke up from her position by the door. It could mean that DIA was fooled by false documentation. It's happened before. Not with special access programs. Elena shot back. The background investigation for that level of clearance includes interviews with people who served with you, verification of your military service through multiple channels, and polygraph examinations. You think I fooled all of that? Blackwood held up a hand, cutting off the argument. What it means, he said slowly, is that DIA believes you are who you claim to be, but it doesn't give me specific details about your military service. Your clearance could be based on your work as a contractor, not your military background. Then ask DIA specifically about my military service. Elena insisted. Ask them if I serve with Task Force 714. They won't give you operational details, but they should be able to confirm or deny whether I was actually assigned to that unit. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. We've asked, Morrison said. We're waiting for a response from their headquarters. But it's now after business hours on the East Coast. We might not get an answer until tomorrow. Tomorrow. Elena felt her composure starting to crack. So I'm supposed to spend the night in a holding cell? Miss putting my daughter to bed? Let her think that something terrible has happened to her mother? All because you can't verify information quickly enough. Ms. Vasquez, Blackwood began. Captain, my daughter lost her father 3 years ago. He was killed in action in a combat zone that officially doesn't exist. She doesn't understand why her daddy never came home, only that he's gone and never coming back. And now her mother is missing, and she doesn't know why, and she's probably thinking that maybe her mom isn't coming back either. Elena's voice cracked. Please, find a way to verify this faster. My daughter has been through enough. The room fell silent. Blackwood and Morrison exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them. Finally, Blackwood closed a folder and stood. I'm going to make some more calls, he said quietly. In the meantime, Sergeant Morrison will take you to a more comfortable holding area. We'll get you something to eat and let you make a phone call to your daughter. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak, without breaking down completely. The more comfortable holding area was actually a small office in the Criminal Investigations Division building, with a desk, a computer, and a couch that looked like it had seen better days. Morrison had brought her a sandwich from the base commissary and, more importantly, had allowed her to call Mrs. Chen to talk to Sophia. Mommy? Sophia's voice had been small and scared, and it had taken everything Elena had not to break down crying on the phone. Hey, baby. I'm so sorry I didn't pick you up from school. Mommy had to help some people at work with something important, and it's taking longer than I expected. Are you okay? Mrs. Chen said you were helping the Army. I'm fine, sweetheart. I'll be home as soon as I can. Probably tomorrow morning. Can you be brave for me tonight? I can be brave. I'm brave like you, Mommy. Those words had nearly destroyed Elena's composure. Yes, you are. I love you so much. Sophia, be good for Mrs. Chen, okay? After the call ended, Elena had sat on the couch staring at nothing. Trying to process the surreal nightmare her life had become in the span of a few hours. Through the office window, she could see the CID building's parking lot, MPs coming and going on their shifts, the ordinary business of base security, continuing while her life hung in limbo. It was nearly 2,100 hours when the sounds of chaos began filtering through the building. At first, it was just raised voices in the corridor, then running footsteps, then the unmistakable sound of multiple radios crackling with urgent traffic, the kind of overlapping communications that meant something serious was happening. Elena stood, moving to the office door. It was locked from the outside, but she could see through the small window into the corridor. MPs were moving with purpose, putting on tactical gear, checking weapons. She caught fragments of radio chatter. All units, main gate, possible hostile medical support. Her training kicked in automatically, her mind processing the patterns and trying to build a picture of what was happening. Something at the main gate. Medical support requested. Multiple units responding. This wasn't a routine security call. Sergeant Morrison appeared in the corridor, speaking urgently into her radio. She caught sight of Elena watching through the window and hesitated, then unlocked the door. What's happening? Elena asked immediately. Morrison's expression was grim. Active situation at the main gate. We've got a vehicle that tried to breach the checkpoint. Driver is now barricaded inside the vehicle, claiming to have explosives. He's demanding to speak to someone about his VA benefits being denied. Elena's stomach dropped. She'd seen the scenario play out before, not here, but in other places. Desperate veterans, usually suffering from untreated PTSD and other mental health issues, reaching a breaking point and making terrible decisions. Sometimes it ended peacefully. Sometimes it didn't. Is EOD en route? Elena asked, using the acronym for Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Morrison looked surprised that Elena knew to ask that. Yes, but they're coming from Popefield. 15 minutes minimum. Meanwhile, we got a potentially unstable individual with possible explosives at one of the busiest entry points to the base. She glanced at her watch. And we got about 50 vehicles backed up on Bragg Boulevard waiting to enter. Some of them are families with kids. What about negotiators? Fort Bragg's primary negotiator is at Fort Benning for training. The backup is trying to get here from Fayetteville, but with evening traffic. Morrison shook her head. We're improvising. Elena's mind was racing. What's the individual's background? Is he actually a veteran? Claims to be. Says he did 3 tours in Afghanistan and that the VA denied his disability claim. Says nobody will listen to him, so he's making them listen. Morrison's radio crackled again, and she turned away to respond. Through the open door, Elena could hear more details coming through on other people's radios. The situation was deteriorating. The individual, now identified as Marcus Turner, age 34, Army veteran, was becoming more agitated. He'd shown what appeared to be a device with wires and had threatened to detonate it if anyone approached his vehicle. Captain Blackwood appeared at the end of the corridor, still in the civilian clothes he'd worn during Elena's interrogation. He was strapping on a tactical vest and checking a sidearm with the efficient movements of someone who'd done this many times before. Captain, Morrison called out, they want you to command post. On my way. Blackwood started to move, then stopped when he saw Elena standing in the office doorway. For a moment, their eyes met, and Elena saw the calculation happening behind his gaze. Captain, Elena said quietly, I can help. You're a suspect in a stolen valor investigation, Blackwood replied. You're not helping with anything. I'm a human intelligence specialist with extensive experience in crisis negotiation and cultural psychology, Elena countered. I've talked down insurgents who were preparing to detonate vehicle bombs. I've negotiated the release of hostages from people who had nothing left to lose. And I understand what that man at your gate is going through. Because I've been there, I've seen what combat does to people and what happens when they come home and feel like nobody cares. Morrison was listening now, her expression conflicted. Captain, we don't have a trained negotiator available. And if Ms. Vasquez actually has experience with this, if she actually has experience, Blackwood repeated. That's the question, isn't it? Is she a trained intelligence specialist? Or is she someone who's researched enough to sound convincing? Then this is your chance to find out, Elena said. Let me help. If I fail, if I can't demonstrate competence, then you'll have your answer about whether my credentials are real. But if I can help de-escalate the situation, if I can prevent someone from getting hurt, isn't that worth the risk? Another MP ran past, shouting into his radio. Subject is threatening to detonate if we don't move all personnel back another 100 meters. Blackwood's jaw tightened. Elena could see the war happening behind his eyes. Duty versus caution. The need for help versus the risk of trusting someone who might be a fraud. If I let you help, he said slowly, you're under my direct supervision. You do exactly what I say when I say it. Any deviation, any sign that you're not who you claim to be, and I pull you out immediately. Understood. Understood. Morrison, stay with her. Keep her in custody at all times. Blackwood turned and started moving toward the command post, then looked back at Elena. And Ms. Vasquez? If this is a con, if you're using a crisis situation to escape or to make yourself look credible, I will personally ensure that you spend the next decade in prison. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Captain. The command post had been established in the base operations center, 100 meters from the main gate. When Elena arrived with Morrison and Blackwood, she found organized chaos. Multiple screens showing different angles of the incident, radio operators coordinating response units, and a cluster of senior officers try and make decisions with incomplete information. The central screen showed the situation in stark detail. A white pickup truck sat at an angle across the inbound lanes of the main gate, its driver's side door open. Inside, partially visible, was a man in civilian clothes. From this angle, Elena could see what appeared to be a vest with wires and dark blocks that could have been explosives strapped to his chest. "Status?" Blackwood asked one of the officers monitoring the situation. "Subject has been making demands for the past 20 minutes. He wants to speak to someone from the VA, someone who can review his disability claim. Says he has documentation proving he was exposed to burn pits in Afghanistan and that his respiratory problems are service-connected, but his claim was denied." The officer, a major, glanced at notes on his tablet. He's also mentioned symptoms consistent with PTSD and TBI. He's agitated, emotional, and keeps talking about how nobody listens to veterans. Elena studied the screen, watching Marcus Turner's body language. Even from a distance, she could read the signs. Hands shaking, constant movement, eyes scanning his surroundings with hypervigilance. This wasn't a terrorist or an ideologue. This was a man in pain who had reached the end of his rope. "Has anyone tried to talk to him?" she asked. The major looked at her, surprised to see a civilian in the command post. "Who is this?" "Someone who might be able to help," Blackwood said, his tone discouraging further questions. "Answer a question." Lieutenant Shaw from the MPs has been attempting to establish dialogue. But Turner keeps saying he wants to talk to someone who understands, someone who's been where he's been. The major gestured to the screen. "Shaw is doing his best, but he's never deployed." Turner picked up on that immediately and said he won't talk to anyone who doesn't know what combat is really like. Elena moved closer to the screen, studying Turner's positioning, his visible gear, the way he was holding something in his right hand. Probably a detonator, or what he claimed was a detonator. "What do we know about his service record?" she asked. "Working on getting that now. Initial checks show he did serve. 3 deployments to Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, medically retired in 2019 with a disability rating of 30%. He's been fighting to get that increased ever since. 30%. Elena's jaw tightened. She'd seen this too many times. Veterans who came home with obvious injuries, physical and psychological, only to have the VA minimize their disabilities and deny them the care and compensation they'd earned. The system wasn't designed to deny claims maliciously, but it was slow, bureaucratic, and often failed the people it was meant to serve. "Let me talk to him," Elena said. The major looked at Blackwood. "Captain?" Blackwood hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Set it up, but I want a direct line where I can cut her off if necessary." 5 minutes later, Elena was sitting at a communications console, wearing a headset that connected to the loudspeaker system at the main gate. Through the screen, she could see Lieutenant Shaw stepping back from his position, gesturing that someone else would be speaking to Turner now. Elena took a breath, centering herself. She'd done this before. Talked to people who were on the edge, who were ready to die and possibly take others with them. It required empathy, honesty, and an understanding of what they were feeling that went beyond textbook psychology. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying across the gate area through the speakers. "My name is Elena. I'm not with the VA, and I'm not here to make promises I can't keep, but I am someone who's been where you've been, and I'd like to talk to you." Through the screen, she saw Turner's head turn toward the speakers. "Who are you?" His voice came through the system, strained and rough. "I'm a veteran. Army, 12 years. Multiple deployments, including Afghanistan. And I know what it's like to come home and feel like nobody understands what you went through or cares what you're dealing with now." There was a pause. Turner was processing this, deciding whether to believe her. "What unit?" he asked finally. Elena glanced at Blackwood, who was watching intently. This was dangerous territory. Mentioning her actual unit would reveal information she wasn't supposed to disclose. But claiming a different unit might be caught as a lie, and that would destroy any credibility she was building. I can't tell you my specific unit, she said honestly. My assignments are classified, but I served in Afghanistan from 2014 to 2016, mostly in Helmand and Kandahar provinces. I've been to FOBs that probably don't officially exist anymore and worked with Afghan forces who are either dead or scattered to the winds now. Turner was quiet, and Elena pressed forward, building the connection. I know what the burn pits smell like, Marcus. I remember that chemical stench that got into everything. Your clothes, your hair, your lungs. I remember standing downwind while they burned everything from medical waste to electronics, and nobody talked about what that was doing to us, because there was no other choice. The trash had to be disposed of, and the burn pits were the only option we had. You were really there, Turner said, and his voice had changed slightly. Less hostile, more cautious. I was really there, and I know what you're going through with the VA. When I separated from the Army, I had chronic respiratory problems, chronic pain, and nightmares that made it impossible to sleep more than a few hours a night. The VA gave me a 40% disability rating initially, and I had to fight for a year to get it increased to something closer to what I actually needed. This was more personal information than Elena typically shared, but she needed Turner to understand that she wasn't just another bureaucrat reading from a script. She was someone who had walked the same path. The system failed you, Marcus, Elena continued. It failed you when it denied your claim. It failed you when it made you fight for benefits you earned through your service. And I know it feels like nobody is listening, like you have to do something dramatic just to be heard. But what you're doing right now, this isn't going to fix the problem. It's only going to make things worse. They need to listen. Turner's voice rose, anguished. I can't breathe, do you understand? I can barely walk up a flight of stairs without gasping for air. I wake up every night thinking I'm back in that village where my buddy got killed. And the VA tells me it's not service-connected? How is that not service-connected? It should be, Elena said simply. You're right to be angry. What they did to you is wrong. But Marcus, if you detonate that device, if there even is a real device, you're going to hurt people who had nothing to do with your claim being denied. MPs were just doing their jobs. Soldiers trying to get home to their families. Maybe civilians. None of them deserve to pay the price for the VA's mistakes. Nobody cares unless you make them care. Turner shot back. I care, Marcus. Right now, in this moment, you have my complete attention. You have the attention of every person on this base. And if you come out of that truck safely, I promise you that I will personally help you navigate the VA appeals process. I'll connect you with veterans advocacy organizations. I'll make sure your story is heard by people who can actually help you. Promises, Turner said bitterly. Everyone makes promises. Then let me make you a different promise, Elena said, leaning forward even though he couldn't see her. I promise that what you're feeling right now, the anger, the frustration, the sense that nobody gives a damn about what you sacrificed, I promise that those feelings are valid. You earn the right to be angry. But Marcus, you also earn the right to live. You survived 3 deployments in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. You made it home when so many others didn't. Don't throw that away now. Not like this. Behind her, Elena could hear the command post personnel listening intently. Blackwood was watching the screens, his expression unreadable. I'm tired, Turner said, and for the first time his voice broke. I'm just so damn tired of fighting. Fighting over there. Fighting over here. Fighting just to get the VA to acknowledge that I'm hurt. When does it end? It ends when you let people help you, Elena said gently. Marcus, I know it feels like you're alone in this, but you're not. There are people who understand what you're going through. There are resources and support systems that can help you. But first, you need to put down the detonator and come out of that truck. Will you do that for me? The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Through the screen, Elena watched Turner's shoulders shaking. He was crying now, the adrenaline and anger giving way to exhaustion and despair. If I come out, he said slowly, they're going to arrest me. Yes, Elena answered honestly. They probably will. You breach a military installation and claim to have explosives. There will be consequences. But Marcus, the consequences of detonating that device, real or fake, are so much worse. If you come out now peacefully, there's a path forward. It might be difficult, but it exists. If you stay in that truck, the only paths forward are all bad ones. Another long silence. Then Turner's voice, barely audible. Will you be there? When I come out. Elena glanced at Blackwood, who was already shaking his head. I can't make that promise, Marcus. I'm not in a position to be at the gate right now. But I'll be here, on this line, talking to you until you're safe. And afterward, if you want to talk more, I'll find a way to make that happen. Okay, Turner said finally, his voice heavy with defeat and relief. Okay, I'm coming out. But I'm moving slowly because this vest is heavy, and I don't want anyone to shoot me. Nobody's going to shoot you, Marcus, Elena said, feeling the tension in command post ratchet up as everyone prepared for this critical moment. Just move slowly, keep your hands visible, and follow the instructions the MPs give you. I'll be right here the whole time. On the screen, Elena watched as Turner began to emerge from the truck. His movements were cautious, deliberate, showing his hands to the MPs who were positioned behind cover. The vest he wore was visible now, a crude assemblage of what looked like road flares and electrical components wired together with duct tape. It might have been dangerous, or it might have been completely inert. The EOD team would have to make that determination. MPs moved in carefully, giving Turner clear instructions. He followed them precisely, lowering himself to his knees, interlacing his fingers behind his head. Within minutes, he was in custody. The vest was being carefully removed by end-of-day personnel in protective gear, and the immediate crisis was over. Elena slumped back in her chair, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaky and exhausted. Around her, the command post erupted in controlled activity, reports being filed, units being stood down, the incident being documented for after-action review. Blackwood was standing beside her console now, his expression complex. That was... He paused, searching for words. That was impressive, Ms. Vasquez. The way you connected with him, the way you read the situation and adapted your approach. That wasn't something you learned from a textbook. No, Elena said quietly. It's something you learn from experience. From being in situations where understanding human psychology is the difference between mission success and mission failure. From serving in places where building trust with people who have every reason not to trust you is literally a matter of life and death. Morrison had moved closer too, her earlier skepticism replaced by something that looked like grudging respect. You knew exactly what to say to him, how to validate his feelings without encouraging his actions, how to build rapport while still maintaining the authority of someone he would listen to. That's what human specialists do, Elena said. We talk to people. We build relationships. We understand motivations and fears and cultural contexts. And sometimes we talk people out of doing things that will get them or others killed. The major who had briefed them earlier approached, tablet in hand. Captain Blackwood, EOD has confirmed that the device Turner was wearing was non-functional. The explosives were road flares, and the wiring wasn't connected to anything. But he did have a lighter, so theoretically, he could have set the flares on fire and caused some burns. Mostly, though, it was a prop to get attention. What about Turner's condition? Elena asked. Medics are evaluating him now. Initial assessment shows significant respiratory distress. He wasn't lying about having trouble breathing. They're taking him to Womack Army Medical Center for a full evaluation before he's processed into custody. Elena closed her eyes briefly, thinking about Marcus Turner's 3 tours in Afghanistan, his denied VA claim, and the desperation that had driven him to this point. The system had failed him, and in trying to make his voice heard, he'd nearly destroyed his life even more completely. Captain, Elena said, looking up at Blackwood, I meant what I told him. If possible, I'd like to follow up on his case. Help him get connected with proper veterans advocacy resources. He needs a lawyer who specializes in VA claims, and he needs mental health support that he's clearly not getting. Blackwood studied her for a long moment. You understand that you're still technically in custody pending investigation of your credentials? You're not in a position to make promises to anyone. I understand that. But I also understand that I'm a veteran who just talked another veteran down from a crisis, and I have resources and connections that could actually help him. So regardless of what happens to me, I'd like to make sure he gets the help he needs. The Major was looking at his tablet again, scrolling through information that had just come through. His expression changed, his eyes widening slightly. "Captain, you need to see this." Blackwood moved to look at the tablet, and Elena watched as his entire demeanor shifted. Whatever he was reading, it was significant. "What is it?" Morrison asked. Blackwood looked up at Elena, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, she saw something in his eyes that might have been belief. "DIA just sent through a partial verification of Ms. Vasquez's service record," he said slowly. "It confirms that she served with—" He glanced at the tablet again. "With a classified Special Operations Task Force from 2014 to 2019. It confirms multiple combat deployments. And it confirms authorization to wear the Presidential Unit Citation for actions taken during classified operations in Iraq and Syria." The command post fell silent. Everyone was looking at Elena now, and she could see the realization dawning on their faces. She had been telling the truth all along. "There's more," Blackwood continued, his voice carrying a note that might have been embarrassment or respect or both. "DIA is requesting immediate release from custody and extending formal apologies for the detention. They're also noting that further details of her service record remain classified, but that we are to consider her credentials fully validated." Morrison let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a curse. "So we just spent the last 6 hours detaining someone who actually earned the decoration she was displaying." "It appears so," Blackwood said. He looked at Elena, and his expression was complicated. Embarrassment, respect, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "Ms. Vasquez, I owe you an apology. We were doing our job, but we should have found a way to verify your information more quickly. The way this was handled, the public nature of your detention, the impact on your family, there's no excuse for that." Elena stood slowly, her legs unsteady from exhaustion, an emotional roller coaster of the past 6 hours. "Captain, you were protecting the honor of people who actually served. I can't fault you for that, even if the process was painful. But I hope this situation teaches everyone something about how classification can create impossible situations for veterans who served in certain capacities." "It will," Blackwood said firmly. "I'm going to make sure this incident results in protocol changes. We need better systems for verifying classified service records without putting veterans through this kind of ordeal." The Major, who had shown Blackwood the tablet, cleared his throat. "Captain, there's one more thing. General Hawthorne wants to see Ms. Vasquez." Elena's stomach dropped. Lieutenant General Sarah Hawthorne was a commanding general of Fort Bragg, one of the most senior officers in the Army. Her involvement meant the situation had escalated to the highest levels of base command. "Now?" Elena asked. "Now," the Major confirmed. "He's waiting in his office." The drive to Lieutenant General Hawthorne's office was silent, except for the hum of the staff car's engine and the occasional crackle of a radio. Captain Blackwood sat in the front passenger seat, while Elena occupied the back. Technically still in Morrison's custody, even though the handcuffs were conspicuously absent. Through the windows, Fort Bragg looked different now. Not foreign or hostile, but somehow familiar again, like a place that was beginning to remember her. The base headquarters building rose before them, its facade illuminated by spotlights that cast sharp shadows across the manicured lawn. This was where command decisions were made, where strategies were developed, where the business of running one of the largest military installations in the world was conducted. Elena had been here before, years ago, for briefings and mission planning sessions that seemed like they'd happened in a different lifetime. As they pulled up to the entrance, Elena noticed several other vehicles already parked in the VIP spaces. Staff cars with flag plates, indicating that other senior officers were present. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be a private conversation. Morrison escorted Elena through security, which processed them with the efficiency of people who'd been told to expect them. They moved through corridors lined with photographs of previous commanding generals, unit citations, and historical displays documenting Fort Bragg's role in military operations spanning decades. Each image was a reminder of the weight of history in this place, of the countless soldiers who had passed through these halls on their way to war. They stopped outside a conference room rather than an office, and Elena's unease deepened. Through the frosted glass, she could see multiple figures seated around a large table. This wasn't going to be a simple meeting with the commanding general. This was something else entirely. Blackwood knocked, and a voice from inside called, "Enter." The scene that greeted Elena when the door opened was surreal. Seated around the conference table were at least a dozen people. Lieutenant General Hawthorne at the head, several colonels and lieutenant colonels along the sides, and 3 people in civilian clothes who had the unmistakable bearing of intelligence community professionals. But it was the man standing near the window who made Elena's breath catch. Colonel Marcus Webb, her former commanding officer from Task Force 714. He was older than Elena remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but the sharp intelligence and quiet intensity that had made him one of the most effective special operations commanders in the Army were unchanged. He turned as Elena entered, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, followed by what might have been anger at the situation she'd been put through, followed by the carefully neutral expression of someone who knew he was in a room full of senior officers. "Ms. Vasquez," Lieutenant General Hawthorne said, standing from his seat at the head of the table. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with the lean build of someone who still maintained rigorous physical fitness standards despite his age and rank. "Please, sit down." Elena glanced at Morrison, who nodded and stepped back to a position by the door. Blackwood remained standing as well, looking distinctly uncomfortable about being in a room with this much brass. Elena moved to the empty chair across from Colonel Webb, her mind racing to understand what was happening. "I apologize for the circumstances that brought you here tonight," Hawthorne began, settling back into his chair with a gesture that invited everyone else to sit as well. "When I was informed about your detention and the reasons for it, I immediately contacted several people who needed to be part of this conversation." He nodded toward the civilians. "These are representatives from the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. They've been briefed on the situation and are here to ensure we handle this appropriately." One of the civilians, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of authority, spoke up. "Ms. Vasquez, I'm Deputy Director Patricia Hammond from DIA Special Activities Division. I oversee personnel security for individuals with your level of clearance and assignment history." She opened a folder in front of her. "I want to start by saying that the situation you experienced today represents a significant failure in our systems. Your credentials were legitimate, properly issued, and fully documented within classified channels. The fact that base security couldn't verify them quickly enough to prevent your detention is unacceptable." "Ma'am, with respect," Blackwood interjected, "we were following proper protocols for suspected stolen valor cases. We had no way of knowing." "Captain, I'm not faulting you or your team for doing your jobs," Hammond interrupted, though her tone wasn't harsh. "The problem is systemic. We have veterans with classified service records who are returning to bases as contractors or visitors, and we don't have adequate mechanisms for verifying their credentials without going through channels that can take days. This isn't the first time this has happened, and unless we make changes, it won't be the last." Hawthorne nodded agreement, "which is why we're here. We need to address both the immediate situation, resolving Ms. Vasquez's detention and clearing her name, and the broader policy issues that allowed this to happen." He looked directly at Elena. "But first, Ms. Vasquez, I want to hear from you. You spent the last 6 hours being treated as a criminal when you were actually a decorated veteran. You have every right to be angry." Elena took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I understand why I was detained. I understand the need to protect against stolen valor. What I don't understand is why the systems aren't better. I served this country for 12 years, much of it in circumstances I still can't fully discuss. I earned the decorations on my credentials, and yet when I tried to simply renew those credentials, I ended up in handcuffs, separated from my daughter, with my reputation potentially destroyed. She paused. I'm not angry at Captain Blackwood or Sergeant Morrison or anyone else who is doing their job. I'm angry at a system that makes it impossible for veterans like me to prove who we are without compromising operational security. That's a fair assessment, Hawthorne said. He turned to Colonel Webb. Colonel, you've been cleared to provide some context about Ms. Vasquez's service. Within appropriate classification limits, of course. Webb stood, moving to a position where everyone could see him. His voice carried the authority of someone who commanded special operations forces in the most dangerous environments on Earth. General, for those in this room without the appropriate clearances, I can't provide specific operational details. But I can confirm that Captain Elena Vasquez served under my command in Task 4714 from 2015 to 2019. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Even those unfamiliar with the specifics knew that Task 4714 was one of the most elite and secretive units in the U.S. military. During her service with the task force, Webb continued, Captain Vasquez participated in operations across multiple theaters, including Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. Her role was critical. She was our primary human specialist and cultural advisor. She built intelligence networks that directly contributed to the capture or elimination of multiple high-value targets. She conducted interrogations that yielded actionable intelligence, saving American and Allied lives. And she did all of this while operating in environments where capture or death were constant possibilities. Webb's eyes found Elena's across the room. The presidential unit citation that was questioned today was earned during a classified operation in 2017 in Syria. I can't provide details, but I can tell you that the entire task force, every member, was awarded that citation for actions that prevented a significant terrorist attack and rescued multiple hostages. Captain Vasquez's intelligence work was instrumental in that operation's success. One of the colonels at the table, a man with Intelligence Corps insignia, leaned forward. Colonel Webb, for clarification, you're confirming that Captain Vasquez actually served in combat operations with your unit? I'm confirming that Captain Vasquez was a valued member of Task Force 714 and that her service record, while largely classified, is completely legitimate, Webb replied. She earned every decoration she wears. And frankly, there are decorations she should have received that were denied or delayed due to classification issues and, quite honestly, institutional biases. Hawthorne's expression hardened slightly at that last comment, but he didn't interrupt. Captain Vasquez left the task force in 2019. Webb continued. She was 6 months pregnant at the time, and she just lost her partner, Lieutenant James Reyes, also a member of our unit. During an operation I still can't discuss. She chose to separate from the Army to raise her daughter. It was one of the hardest losses our unit experienced, because she was exceptional at her job, but we all understood her decision. The room was completely silent now. Several officers were looking at Elena with new understanding. This wasn't just a veteran with a classified service record. This was someone who'd sacrificed a career in one of the most elite units in the military to become a single mother after losing her partner in combat. Hammond from DIA spoke again. General Hawthorne, for the record, our agency has conducted multiple background investigations on Captain Vasquez, most recently 6 months ago when her special access clearances were renewed. Every investigation has confirmed her service record, her decorations, and her qualifications. The credentials she was carrying today were legitimate and properly issued. There was no fraud, no deception, and no violation of any regulations. So what we have, Hawthorne said slowly, is a decorated combat veteran who was detained, handcuffed, and held for 6 hours because our verification systems couldn't handle classified service records quickly enough. He looked at Blackwood. Captain, tell me honestly, at what point during this process did you begin to suspect that Ms. Vasquez might actually be telling the truth? Blackwood straightened in his chair. Sir, when she successfully talked down the subject at the main gate, the way she handled that situation, the knowledge she demonstrated, the psychological techniques she employed, the rapport she built, that wasn't something someone without actual training and experience could fake. That's when I started to believe her credentials might be legitimate. So it took a crisis situation for anyone to consider that she might actually be who she claimed to be, Hawthorne observed, his tone carrying an edge. That's unacceptable. We need better systems. He turned to one of the staff officers. I want a policy working group established immediately. We need to develop protocols for verifying classified service records that don't require detaining the veteran in question for hours while we wait for headquarters to respond. Yes, sir, the officer replied, making notes. Hawthorne returned his attention to Elena. Ms. Vasquez, on behalf of Fort Bragg, I want to formally apologize for what you experienced today. You were treated inappropriately. Your reputation was damaged, and your family was affected. None of that should have happened. Sir, I appreciate the apology, Elena said carefully. But what I really need is for my name to be cleared publicly. Everyone who saw me detained today, the soldiers at the gate, the people in the visitor center, the MPs who processed me, they all think I'm a stolen valor case. That perception will follow me unless something is done to correct it. Agreed? Hawthorne said. He looked at one of his public affairs officers. I want a statement prepared and released through official channels. Fort Bragg detained a veteran today due to verification issues with classified service records. The veteran credentials were legitimate. The detention was an error. And we're implementing policy changes to prevent this from happening again. Make it clear that this was our mistake, not hers. Yes, sir. Colonel Webb moved back to the table, sitting down in a chair near Elena. His expression had softened from the formal bearing he'd maintained while briefing the general, and Elena could see traces of the commander she'd known, the one who'd pushed his team relentlessly but also protected them fiercely. Elena, he said, using her first name now that the formal briefing was complete. I need to tell you something. When DIA contacted me this afternoon to verify your credentials, I was in the middle of a training exercise at Fort Liberty. The moment I heard what was happening, that you've been detained for suspected stolen valor, I dropped everything and got here as fast as I could. You didn't have to do that, sir, Elena said quietly. Yes, I did. You serve under my command with distinction. You save lives, including mine on at least 2 occasions. The idea that anyone would question your service, that you be treated like a criminal, his jaw tightened. That was unacceptable to me personally. One of the colonels at the table, a woman with Special Forces insignia, spoke up. General, if I may, I think there's a broader issue here that we need to address. Captain Vasquez's situation highlights how difficult it is for women who serve in special operations roles to have their service recognized, especially when much of it remains classified. Go on. Colonel Parks, Hawthorne prompted. Sir, women have been serving in combat roles and special operations for longer than most people realize, but because many of those assignments were under classified programs, there's a perception gap. People assume women weren't in those units, couldn't have done those things. So when someone like Captain Vasquez presents credentials that document her actual service, it's met with skepticism rather than recognition. Hammond from DI nodded agreement. Colonel Parks is correct. We have female veterans with extraordinary service records who can't prove their service without compromising ongoing operations. Some of them have left government service and are struggling to find employment because civilian employers don't believe their credentials. Others are harassed by veterans organizations who accuse them of stolen valor because they don't fit preconceived notions of what special operations personnel look like. Elena felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. For years, she'd felt isolated by her service, unable to talk about it, unable to share the experiences that had defined her adult life, unable to connect with other veterans because her story was too classified to tell. Hearing these senior officers acknowledge the problem made her feel less alone. This isn't just about me, Elena said. There are other women who serve in similar capacities. Some of them are still serving. Some have separated and are facing the same challenges I am. We need better systems not just for verification, but for recognition, for allowing veterans to have their service acknowledged in ways that don't compromise security, but also don't force them to hide what they did. Hawthorne was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. You're right. And I think today's incident, as unfortunate as it was, gives us an opportunity to make changes that will benefit many veterans beyond just yourself. He looked around the table. I want recommendations from all of you. How do we balance operational security with veterans' ability to document and be recognized for their service? How do we train security personnel to handle situations like this more effectively? How do we support veterans transitioning out of classified programs? The discussion that followed was substantive and detailed, with officers and DI representatives offering various suggestions. Elena listened, occasionally contributing her own perspective from a veteran's point of view. It was surreal. 6 hours ago, she'd been sitting in a holding cell being treated like a criminal. Now she was at a table with senior officers helping to shape policy that could affect thousands of veterans. But underneath the policy discussion, Elena's mind kept returning to more immediate concerns. Her daughter, her reputation, her career as a contractor, which might be damaged regardless of any official statements clearing her name. As if reading her thoughts, Hammond spoke up during a lull in the conversation. Ms. Vasquez, I want to address your employment situation. I understand you work for Sterling Security Solutions as a cultural intelligence consultant. That's correct, ma'am. I spoke with their CEO about an hour ago. He's been briefed on the situation and understands that today's detention was an error. Your employment and security clearances are not affected. In fact, he asked me to pass along a message. He said your job will be waiting for you whenever you're ready to return, and he's increasing your compensation as an apology for any distress the situation may have caused. Elena felt tears threatening, but held them back. Thank you, ma'am. That's a relief. There's more, Hammond continued. DI would like to offer you a direct hire position as a senior intelligence analyst, working on programs related to counterterrorism and special operations support. The position would be based here at Fort Bragg, so you wouldn't need to relocate, and the compensation would be significantly higher than your current contractor rate. Elena stared at her. You're offering me a job after detaining me for 6 hours? I'm offering you a job because you're exceptionally qualified and because DI needs people with your experience and skills. Hammond corrected. The detention was a mistake that never should have happened. This job offer is based entirely on your merits. Elena struggled to process this. I need time to think about it. My daughter has to be my first priority. Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer will remain open. Hammond closed her folder. But I want you to know that we value what you've done for this country, and we want to make sure you have opportunities that recognize that service. Hawthorne checked his watch. It's now 2,230 hours. Ms. Vasquez has been away from her daughter for over 9 hours. I think we should conclude this meeting and allow her to go home. He looked directly at Elena. I'm arranging for a staff car to take you home. I'm also having our public affairs office contact your local media with our statement. So by tomorrow morning, everyone will know that today's detention was our error, not your fault. Sir, there's one more thing. Elena said before she could second-guess herself. The veteran from the gate incident, Marcus Turner. He needs help that he's not getting from the VA. Is there any way Fort Bragg could provide support or intervention with his case? Hawthorne nodded approvingly. Already being handled. I've had my staff contact Womack Army Medical Center and the VA regional office. Mr. Turner is going to get a comprehensive medical evaluation, and his disability claim is being fast-tracked for review by someone who actually understands combat-related respiratory injuries. We're also connecting him with veterans' legal services and mental health support. Thank you, sir. You talked him down from a potentially deadly situation, Hawthorne said. Making sure he gets the help he needs is the least we can do. And frankly, It's what we should have been doing all along for all our veterans. Colonel Webb stood, and everyone else began gathering their materials, preparing to depart. But Webb gestured for Elena to wait, and she remained seated as the room gradually emptied until only the two of them and General Hawthorne remained. "Elena," Webb said, his voice quieter now. "How are you really doing?" Not the professional answer, the real answer. Elena took a breath, considering how honest to be. Some days are harder than others. Sophia keeps me grounded. She's the reason I get up every morning. But there are nights when I lie awake thinking about the operations, the people we lost, James. Her voice caught slightly on her late partner's name. I wonder sometimes if I made the right choice, leaving the unit, if there was more I could have done. You made the only choice you could make, Webb said firmly. You had a daughter who needed her mother. And Elena, you'd already given more than most people could ever imagine. 12 years, 7 deployments, countless operations. You earned the right to step back and build a different kind of life. Did I, though? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I abandoned the mission, like I should be out there doing the work instead of sitting safe stateside. That guilt is something every operator feels when they leave, Webb replied. We all wrestle with it. But Elena, you need to understand something. You didn't abandon anything. You served with honor. You completed your mission, and you made a sacrifice. Choosing to leave a career you loved to raise your daughter, that was just as significant as any sacrifice you made in the field. Hawthorne, who had been listening quietly, added his own perspective. Ms. Vasquez, I've been in the Army for 34 years. I've seen a lot of soldiers struggle with the transition from active service to civilian life, especially those who served in special operations. The guilt you're describing is normal, but I want you to consider something. By raising your daughter, by showing her what strength and service look like, by being there for her in a way that many military families can't. That's a mission too. Maybe not one that comes with medals or recognition, but a mission nonetheless. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak, without her voice breaking. And today, Hawthorne continued, when you talked Marcus Turner out of that truck, you prove that you're still serving. You're still making a difference. You don't need to be in uniform to be a warrior, Ms. Vasquez. You just need to keep doing what you've always done, showing up when you're needed and giving everything you have to help others. The staff car that delivered Elena home pulled up to her small house in a quiet neighborhood just off base at 2,315 hours. Through the front window, Elena could see lights on. Mrs. Chen was still awake, probably worried and waiting for news. The curtain twitched as the car stopped, and by the time Elena reached the front door, Mrs. Chen had opened it, her expression relieved and concerned in equal measure. Elena, thank God. Sophia has been asking about you every 20 minutes. I told her you were helping the Army with something important, but she was getting scared. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for taking care of her. Is she still awake? She fell asleep about an hour ago, but I think she'll wake up when she hears you. Elena stepped inside her home in familiar surroundings. The couch Sophia liked to build pillow forts on, the photos on the wall showing happier times.